This is something that I've been planning for and working on for many years now. I've thought about it, psyched myself out, and thought about it some more, and I figured it was finally time to just go for it. In fact, I've been hinting at it for well over a year now. I could do some sort of vivarium, maybe a turtle, maybe a saltwater tank. Got your puffer fish, who we getting next?
Saltwater.
I like to preemptively buy containers and materials. I got this though for some future projects which we'll discuss at a later date, such as this 25-gallon tank, which I'm really excited to get moving on. Don't expect it anytime soon though. It's going to take quite a while to get it looking exactly how I want. As many of you know, 2022 has been a crazy year for me with regular life stuff, my finger injury, the move, among other things. I had full intentions to do this all earlier in the year, and I wanted to keep it a surprise until I finally did, but just a few months ago, I actually spilled the beans about it. Started Saltwater, which on a side note, I can't believe that nobody noticed or said anything about the RPM that I've shown in various videos. Given the circumstances at hand, especially the move, I kept pushing this back because I knew it would be irresponsible if I had begun at the old house. I've been keeping fish for well over 16 years now, but that has been exclusively in the freshwater world. I absolutely love it, but it's glaringly obvious that there's a whole other side to this hobby that I've been missing out on. All things considered, my new plan was to begin in early 2023. My friends over at Fritz reached out to me though not long ago, and they said they wanted to help me set up my first saltwater aquarium. Truthfully, I hesitated at first and almost said no. As I thought about it some more though, I figured, you know what, I could use this as fuel to force me to finish the room sooner. For the past week or so, I've been working non-stop to finish up this room, and although I still have to add the final touches, it's done enough to start adding enclosures. And I believe that the new beginnings of a proper animal room space are going to change everything. So it makes complete sense that the very first build that we do in the new animal room is a saltwater reef aquarium. It goes without saying that many of you have been hounding me about this since the advent of the channel. I was and do listen, but I have to do things on my term. I've researched all of this a good deal. However, I know that the real learning is all going to happen once I finally start doing it. So I want to preface this entire thing by saying that I only loosely understand what I'm doing here. I'm by no means an expert, nor is this intended to be a tutorial or a how-to guide or anything like that. There's plenty of resources out there that will teach you how to do this step by step if you want to learn more. That said, I want to document what it's like to transition from a lifelong freshwater keeper into the salty side. Thus far, it's been daunting for myself, and I believe that's the typical sentiment. So let's go on this journey together of learning and expanding our horizons into the beautiful world of saltwater aquariums. This video is sponsored by Fritz Aquatics. The best place to start with all of this is probably where the aquariums differ the most, the water. Now you may think that salt water is composed of exactly that, salt and water. However, the salt used to create a saltwater tank or marine salt is a little different than what you're used to. At a high level, it's composed of various other things such as magnesium and potassium. Take a look at this RPM from Fritz for example, and you'll see what I mean. So all I gotta do is mix this up in some water and we're good to go, right? Not exactly. The thing to consider is what water we are mixing this with. Our tap water usually comes from municipal treatment facilities or wells. In my case, I'm running off of well water. In either situation, our tap water contains an array of minerals and other components. Meaning that if we were to mix this into the water as is, there would be a lot more going on than what's desired. This could cause an array of issues such as unwanted algae growth. Think of it from the freshwater side. We're always trying to balance excess nutrients in the tank to create stability. The same goes for saltwater. This is where the RODI, or reverse osmosis deionized system I showed earlier, comes into play. It sends the tap water through a series of filters which remove pretty much all impurities, and what remains is pure water. So if we start out at zero, so to speak, with RODI water, it's much easier to manage exactly what's in it. I've been running my unit for the past 2 days to create water that's a suitable vehicle for marine salt. I have two 55-gallon drums here that I'm using to store all of the water. Even though I got the water and the salt all sorted out, I still don't have the other components I need for this build, so I gotta reach out to Fritz to get that all sorted out. Okay, so I got my man Sean here, and I mentioned this to him maybe about 2 years ago. Then he called me maybe about a month ago and was like, dude, we got to get you set up with a saltwater tank.
This sounds exciting. Your first big saltwater tank.
I don't want to do anything too crazy since it's my first time going around, but I think going kind of like an all-in-one route probably makes the most sense. You know, for the ease of everything, we could do something like that. I also need substrate, which, you know, just some sand, that's cool. As far as scape goes, I was thinking something with like arches and all kinds of little openings and crevices throughout it. So whatever type of rock you think is appropriate for that, that's cool with me. I have epoxy to put it together though, so we're good in that.
I can get all that for you. Get you some arch rocks, and I can get the aquarium for you over at the DFW Aquarium Supply. And I'll just put it all on a pallet and ship it over to your house. That way, when I get out there, you've got it all. I'll just come over to your house on the 12th, pick out some basic stuff because we'll have the turbo start to cycle it and not go too fast or anything, but just put some basic stuff in there to get it going.
Good deal, man. Sounds good.
All right, dude. Well, it's great talking to you. Have a great evening, great weekend, and tell your wife I said hi, and I'll see you later.
Exactly 1 week later, and the shipment is here. It's pretty tall, so I think there's a lot going on in here, and I got my work cut out for me, so let's get this thing unboxed. I don't know even what half of this stuff is. I know we got the Sump, Hardscape, and I feel like components to the Sump, but I don't know what all this is over here. We got the stand there, and the tank is still in the garage. I did get Nate over here to help me out. He's ready to go, so we're gonna move the stand where it's gotta go, get the tank going, and we'll get escaping. We moved the stand to the desired location near the entrance of the animal room and went to get the aquarium. It took a while to determine where it should go, and this seemed like the best location. The suction cups came in handy as always, making the task a breeze. This Hermes tank is made from 1/2 inch thick glass, measures 36 inches wide by 24 inches tall by 24 inches deep, and holds right around 90 gallons. The Sump, on the other hand, is made from acrylic, and when running will hold roughly 15 gallons of water. That means that the total capacity of the entire system is right around 105 gallons. As a beginner, this should be easier for me to keep than something smaller. We went and unboxed everything for the Sump, which is what the majority of those boxes from earlier contained. Something that really came in handy with this was an air duster. Bulkheads and other plumbing components are often sabotaged by the most minute debris, so cleaning these items in some way is always recommended. Luckily, I'm already very familiar with sumps, so it was just a matter of getting everything installed. We put the Sump into the stand to start, but there was a minor issue. You'll see here that it slides around. I decided to cut out a piece of EVA foam to go under it for stability. It made a huge difference. I went on to install the bulkheads in the bottom of the overflow box by hand. We went back with channel locks and gave them about a quarter turn to ensure everything was tight. When in doubt, less is more. You can always go back and tighten it if it leaks, but if you go too tight, you could easily crack the glass or acrylic. Anyway, this all works because of the overflow box, which goes on the outside of the tank, and rear box, which goes on the inside. These are locked together with a bulkhead fitting that sandwiches the gasket between the glass and the overflow. This keeps it all watertight once secure. As for the tube attachments, these need to be welded on with PVC cement. I typically use OD Fusion because it doesn't need a primer and bonds ABS to PVC quite well. These fittings both received a vinyl tube that directs the overflowing water down into the sump. I welded the connections down here as well. After connecting the tubes, I locked it all down with hose clamps for a watertight fit. Moving back up to the tank, we added the return piece. This is actually one that I had laying around the house. It's a split lock line with flare nozzles to better disperse the flow. I wrapped some Teflon tape around a 90-degree threaded connector and installed it onto the outside of the bulkhead. That leads down to the pump, which is a Sicce Syncra SDC. The cool thing about this pump is that it has adjustable flow and Bluetooth capabilities. Anyway, I hooked this up to the return and installed hose clamps on the back of the stand to keep the build clean. After all of that, we put the tank back into position and checked to see if it was level. It was spot on from left to right, but off from front to back. A few composite shims took care of that no problem. So we got the sump all taken care of. I'm gonna start unboxing these rocks here and looking into some of the other things. And we got a shop light on here for now just so we can see on it. We're not getting the proper lighting until tomorrow, but I got Nate over here cleaning it up something proper. All right, so we got the rocks all laid out here just so that we can get a better idea of what we're gonna do whenever we scape this. And we got all kinds of different ones here. We've got the flats or the platforms. Can create little shelves out of those. I don't think we're gonna be using the branches. If we do, it'll be very sparingly. And then we got a bunch of shapes and arches over here. So in theory, we should be able to create a pretty cool scape with all of this, but we'll see how it turns out. Prior to adding the rocks, we put down a decent layer of sand. This, along with the rocks, will actually serve as the primary home for beneficial nitrifying bacteria and is extremely important. It will also create a base for the rocks, adding stability. As in freshwater, the hardscape is arguably one of the most important aspects to a successful aquarium. Not only does it improve aesthetics, but it also promotes a fuller, more natural range of behaviors from the inhabitants. Like I explained to Sean earlier, my vision is to create depth and interest through arches and crevices. This selection of life rocks, which are manufactured stone, made it extremely easy to pull it off. Per usual, I began with the largest stone, which will act as my key element. With Nate's help, I set it on top of smaller stones to create a cave of sorts. I think it ended up being a really awesome focal point to build off from. Using the various arched pieces, we created a lot of great features that draw you into the design. As we did, we were very conscious to leave adequate spaces between elements. This will more effectively create visual barriers and homes for the fish and various invertebrates, but it will also give the coral space to thrive and grow. This is also a good time to mention that it can be really helpful to set up a tank with somebody you work well with. Nate and I both enjoy building hardscapes, so we were constantly bouncing ideas off of each other and experimenting to get the best results. Plus, building a precarious design like this is much easier when you have 4 hands to work with. With that in mind, it's imperative that we lock these stones together with epoxy to ensure it doesn't topple over. I mentioned this stuff earlier in the video, and you've seen me use it in previous projects. It's totally safe for fish and is very easy to work with. You just pull off a section, knead it together until the color is cohesive, and press it between the contact points. Anyway, I went through and locked in what we've done so far. That made it much easier to add the platforms and select locations. These flat stones not only tied the scape together, but they'll also serve as platforms for various corals, such as chalices. Here's a look at the final hardscape. I don't know about you, but I think it looks pretty incredible, and I know it will serve as a great foundation to build a reef off of. However, there's a lot of exposed epoxy. Although most of this will be hidden long term by coral and coralline algae, we might as well hide it now using the classic superglue technique I've shown many times before. We simply applied glue over top of the epoxy and pressed sand into it. It's a pretty simple step, but it makes it all look so much better. That said, there were quite a few spots here, so it took a while to get it all concealed. And by this point our friends from Fritz showed up, and it was time to see what they thought of our meticulously crafted hardscape.
And there's the tank.
Yep.
Oh wow.
We got bad news though.
What?
The video might have to be off. We accidentally dropped a rock, and if you look over here, we cracked it.
Oh no! Are you serious?
No, it's just super glue.
Oh no! Oh, dude, I was like, that for sure is a showstopper. Wow.
What do you
the
think?
stack is super impressive.
And I was like, I wonder if he's going to try to take it up and out of the aquarium like he did so many other times. But no, this is great, dude. This is never what a first time saltwater escape looks like.
Anyway, after the hijinks, Sean unpacked various items that he brought, including the lights. He selected 2 Kessel A360Xs. I let him install those since we did everything else to this point. He also took care of the protein skimmer since we didn't install it earlier. While we were down here, I also installed a light above the sump to create a refugium. At this point, we could finally fill up the tank, but I should rewind a little bit. The previous day, we unboxed the RPM and waited out to get the correct ratios for each 55-gallon drum. Then we poured it in and let it dissolve until the next day. During this time, each drum contained a pump to circulate the water and assist in dissolving the salt. I put a heater in each as well, so everything was at the correct temperature. Throughout this process, Nate went back a few times and manually mixed it to get anything that settled on the bottom. Now then, back to filling up the tank. We dropped in an empty sandbag to minimize things from getting stirred up, hooked a hose up to a pump, and filled it up. This is when it all started getting real. Although cloudy, as the water filled in the space, I can honestly imagine how this could look in a few months. As we worked out all of the details for this build, one of the things that we really wanted to do was get livestock and corals. Now initially we were going to go to a local fish store, but as I thought through things, a light bulb went off in my head. I remember meeting Than from Tidal Gardens at Aquashella just a few years ago. Back then, he said if I ever wanted to get into saltwater, to reach out. He's located in Ohio, which isn't far from me. So when we reached out and asked him what he thought, he was more than happy to have us by and show us around. All of this is housed in an unassuming warehouse, but there's no mistaking that blue hue shining out from the windows. And what lay tucked away inside was incredible. It happens to me often, but this was especially one of those times where I felt very humbled to be in the position that I am. For me, as somebody who doesn't necessarily know what I'm looking at here, it's really cool to just kind of go along and not know what any of this is. You know, the folks here, they're explaining it all to me and I'm learning as I go, and it's really cool, and I'm just kind of getting a sense for the type of corals that would be appropriate for a beginner, things that kind of have that aesthetic that I'm looking for. And I mean, honestly, it's just a whole different world in here, and it's really opening my eyes to the possibility of different projects and scapes. And you know, I'm already looking into the future, and I've hardly even begun here, and I'm really excited for all of this. I've been in the aquarium world for so long that I've been exposed to saltwater a good bit. However, I've never been to a place quite like this. As if my introduction to saltwater and being exposed to all of this wasn't enough, I also got to pick out various corals for my new tank. Than wanted to know what I was looking for. I told him I wanted beginner-friendly corals and some with a little movement. Truthfully, if it looks cool and is easy, then that's perfect. And for me, it's usually shape and movement that draw me in, not necessarily the colors. Anyway, I actually got to select and bag them all for myself, which was awesome. I got a few chalices, hammers, and frog spawn. Naturally, I was very nervous throughout this process and handling them, since I've never done it before. That said, I'm the type of person that just has to get my hands into stuff and try it out for myself. So in some way, this probably was the perfect introduction for me. And even though I got to go around and see all of these beautiful corals, select many of them for myself, the most important thing is that I got to learn a lot from this experience. I could go on and on about this, but we still need to get the fish. To get those, we decided to stop by a small fish store on the way home, Sharkbait LLC. As you may have expected, we're going to keep stocking very light, and we wanted to go with something beginner friendly. So, as you probably could have expected, I went with a pair of clownfish. Truthfully, I just wanted a pair of normal clowns, but they didn't have the personality. I went around and looked at all of the tanks to gauge the fish's personalities. This is often what I do, and the orange storms were very personable and looked good, which is typically a great indicator of a robust fish. So I made my selection. We got some snails and crabs as well. Back in the animal room, and things are shaping up. The tank cleared up a bit, but a little cloudiness is fine for now. Acclimating the coral, snails, and crabs was similar to what you've seen me do with freshwater items. A float acclimation was more than sufficient. This ensures they gradually adjust to the temperature of the tank, which is a cozy 77 degrees Fahrenheit. As for the fish, it's probably best to do a drip acclimation. What this entails is that the fish go into a separate bucket, while you slowly add water from the tank through a drip. This allows for a slow mix, making it less stressful for the fish. I just used an airline tube and a flow valve to get this effect. That all went on for about an hour. Finally, for what we've all been waiting for, stocking the tank. I dropped the crabs in to start. It was so cool to watch them disperse throughout the enclosure. Then came time to add the corals. It was really helpful to have Sean around for this step. He's familiar with the various conditions these corals prefer, such as flow and lighting, and was able to direct me to where I should place them. He gave me a few other tips as well, such as cutting off the plugs. This seemed really sketchy to me at first, but was actually pretty easy. Anyway, we continued adding them piece by piece until we created something I like and that will work well for the inhabitants. Anyway, after all of that, I let Sean put the snails in since he is Sean Snails. Last but not least, I added the clownfish. Since this is a new tank, you know that I had to add turbo start. You typically see me use the freshwater formula, but this does the same exact thing, only for saltwater. It immediately seeds the tank with denitrifying bacteria that makes it safe for livestock. Even so, it was best to keep stocking light for now while the tank seasons. Things have really settled in over the past few days and it's all looking good. The coral have opened up nicely and appear well in their new home. I have yet to epoxy them in, but I wanted to observe them for a little longer to ensure they're happy where they are. The clownfish are also way better than I expected. Honestly, I didn't want them for the longest time because they're so common. However, I knew they were one of the best choices I could have went with, so I got them anyway, and I'm very glad I did. They're super inquisitive, active, beautiful, and eat well. What more could you ask for in a fish? Likewise, it's been so much fun to observe the crabs and snails. It's no secret that I love a good snail, but I've done very little with crabs on the channel till now. They're so lively and always up to something. And from what I could tell, even with an immature tank, that's a key characteristic of reef setups. There's always something going on somewhere to observe. Since this is all new for me, I knew it was best to keep the amount of coral and fish very light for now. As much as I want to go out and get everything now, I'm happy to take it slow, enjoy the ride, and learn as much as I can in the process. Plus, these frags alone would fill in the space quite substantially. In all things considered, I know a lot of what I want to do with this, but I'm certain there's stuff out there that I'd love to work with that I don't even know exists. So for those of you well versed in this, let me know what type of coral, fish, and other things you'd think I'd enjoy and find rewarding. There are other things I failed to mention throughout the build, like the power heads and heater. I figured they're self-explanatory enough, but I'll do a more in-depth breakdown of the system in a later video. I'll also address other details like modifying the stand to match everything else, soundproofing filtration, the refugium, making a lid, and much more at a later time. However, I should mention that the lights are adjustable and I can make them bluer to improve colors. I personally enjoy the regular look of the tank though. I intend to document every aspect of this journey so you can see and learn from my wins, failures, and everything in between. There's sure to be many, but I'm ready for the challenge. I think this was a great place to begin, and I'm very thankful for the opportunity to do it like this. I realize that most won't get into saltwater this way, so it's not quite as accessible as many of the other projects I've shown. That said, as I gain experience and fully understand what works for me, I'll take a more DIY approach for future setups. Even so, I'll be experimenting outside of this tank very soon. I just have to finish up my quarantine room first. I'll have plenty of saltwater tanks in there for that very purpose, and more. There's so much more to discuss, like checking for and adjusting water parameters, feeding corals, quarantine, and so on, but I feel like that's all beyond the scope of what I want to discuss in this video. I believe that's a good place to conclude on all of this. I more or less just wanted to document the entire journey thus far and show how I got to this point. A huge thanks to everybody involved who helped make this build possible, and for all of you who have encouraged me to do this for many years. Having Nate around was a huge help because he works with a lot of saltwater tanks. The irony being that I'm always teaching him stuff since he's my apprentice, but in this instance, he was educating me. On a side note, what do you think of our hardscape? I'm really pleased with it, and I think it looks awesome from all three sides. I just can't wait to see it filled up with coral and fish. A huge thanks to Fritz for sponsoring the build as well. This obviously would not have been possible without them. Additionally, they filmed that all on their channel as well. So if you want to see more and wouldn't mind doing a favor for me, I'll link that down in the pinned comment and the video description whenever they upload it. If you could check it out, that'd be cool. Also, a huge thanks to Than for letting us come to Tidal Gardens. That was an awesome experience, and I'm sure it won't be the last time I'm there. And I want to thank each and every one of you for supporting my ventures all of these years. I'm seriously so excited for all these new beginnings, and I can't wait to see where they take us. Also, if I could get a like for finally going saltwater, that would be really cool. Anyway, that's all I have for you in this one, Serpa Squad. As always, take care and peace.